Okay, this one will be in English. Just to remind you, juste pour vous rappeler, les speed datings, c'est pas mal rempli, mais il y a encore de la place. Speed datings are almost full, but there are still spaces, so you can register. All right, so last conversation of the day, last but not least, it's all about this intangible heritage thing, patrimoine intangible. Lot of the contemporary artists nowadays they use old material, old cultural or artistic material, and they eventually reuse it, recycle it. Someone for the good and someone for the bad or the worst. So, and we have at the same time, we are confronted to the position of some extreme right people. Their approach to culture, especially in this region, for example, where they are very powerful more and more, is to say heritage, tradition, visibility. Understatement, don't touch anything. This is our heritage, starting from the idea that heritage is something that never moves. So here, for example, they have this kind of Provençal show up, where ladies wear very clean and very nice old-style clothes from the 19th century, as if the ladies at that time would walk in the street with this extremely clean and white Sunday clothes, although we know through the historians that the reality was probably much more rough and much more mixed, where at that time people here would mix with clothes coming from Africa, from extreme East, Southeast Asia. All people would be very creative and inventive and would change their, mix their clothes and mix their appearance, just for fun. So we believe that this fixed, frozen vision of heritage is not the proper one, and the artists actually show us, and especially in the Arab world, how they can recycle tradition to modern things. This is the question. The question of this conversation is intangible heritage. Should we protect it, or transform it? Of course, what is protection? What is transformation? Maybe Vicki Ann, I give you the floor. So Vicki Ann, as you could see on the paper, is an outstanding career. She used to be the ambassador of Malta in France and in Tunisia. So she knows both sides of the Mediterranean. Malta is just in the middle. And Vicki Ann is in charge of the University of Arts in Malta. And she has a lot of experience. And she knows very much about this concept of moving tradition and intangible heritage. Vicki Ann, the floor is yours.
Well, to start with, I think we need to understand that intangible heritage covers such a wide area of realities. I mean, on the one hand, we have intangible heritage with regard to ceremony, with regard to dance, music, and the arts. And on the other hand, we have intangible heritage with regard to artisanship.
Yeah.
And therefore, in one case, there is a sort of a product which is produced like a carpet or something in brass or whatever, and or lace or this sort of thing. And on the other hand, there is a celebration, a dance, which is going to disappear after it happens. Yeah. Mm. So the idea of preservation is very different. Because in both, what links both is the notion of transmission.
Okay.
Because ultimately, when you have a tradition, whether it is an artistic or an artisanship, or it links to artisanship, the idea is that before you can transform it, you have to be able to transmit it. Now, when you transmit, you will never 100% transmit what...
Duplicate.
Exactly. It's like when you learn how to cook a cake. Your mother teaches you how to make a cake, and you will make the same cake, but it will always taste a little bit different because it is yours and not hers. And therefore, the fact of transmission... and therefore, I think the idea, what is important, however, is when we come to these two elements which are being lost, in the sense there is a lot of intangible realities which are being lost. For example, just to give you an example, in my country, the making of lace. The making of lace is a very long process, and basically one of the reasons why it could be so easily transmitted was because it didn't cost any money to make. I mean, it wasn't translated into paid hours of work. The minute it starts being translated into paid hours of work, the price of a lace doily immediately multiplies by 3. So, also, do women today who are working have the time to sit down and create something which is so long and elaborate as a process? Now, the point is that at that point, how do you guarantee transmission? I mean, in Malta, I think we found solutions by introducing the idea of hobby, of competition, etc. But if I had to take that piece of lace, therefore, the knowledge, which in order to produce it, you have to have the knowledge behind it to be able to produce it. If I put in that knowledge in producing this piece of lace, but then, for example, in changing the context where this lace is used, for example, instead of in a doily, putting it in a dress, or in a, in something completely different, in a place where, or make flowers out of it, in something where you wouldn't have thought of applying that technique. That is not simply, you are protecting it, but you are also transforming it into another, through creativity, into another artistic artifact. And it is the same with traditions which are less, how shall I put it, less tangible. For example, dances. I mean, there are, or music. The fact of having, for example, all the preservation of instruments, the fact of creating instruments in the old way, automatically, and reapplying these instruments in new contexts. But the fact of being to create these instruments is already a task in itself of preservation, because you need to have the skills. And I think that intangible heritage is measured in relation to skills and to how much you remember of those skills, as well as to tradition.
Yeah, but your point of view is really interesting, because you're coming from a place where, for me, coming from Marseille, it's very hard to imagine tradition as something fixed forever, because you're just at the crossroad of so many different cultures. You're just in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, so you have, of course, Italian influence, English influence. Used to be an English colony, can I say that?
Yes, 100%.
A lot of Arab influence. Your language is almost very close to Arab. So you have this kind of constant change history in the production of culture. It was never fixed like it has been like that for the last 6 centuries. It was always moving. So there is always a recycling, readaptation of what used to be tradition and coming to something new, isn't it?
Yes, but I think that this is the reality everywhere. I mean, whatever people may say on the fact of you will never freeze time. And you cannot, I mean, you cannot just cut time out and put it in a freezer. It doesn't happen that way. The fact of, if you look, for example, I was giving the example of lace, all right?
Yeah.
If you look at somebody who produced lace in the 18th century and you look at the stitches and you also look at the cotton, first of all, the cotton used to be woven in a very different way.
It's different, yeah.
It used to be grown in a very different way.
Yeah.
It used to be
Even the plant.
harvested in a very different way. It used to be spun in a very different way. So you can't have the same cotton, which automatically means you are not going to have exactly the same stitch, even if you are going to repeat it. So you cannot freeze things in time. It's impossible. But what you have to what you have to be able to transmit is the knowledge, the skill of producing something, the skill of producing a dance, the skill of producing a certain kind of music, the skill of producing a certain type of dress, or object or carpet or whatever. That skill has to be encouraged and transmitted. And against the kind of modernization of today, where everything is becoming more and more machine-made, etc., etc., this is often looked at as a waste of time. Even sort of, some traditional dances. However, these traditional dances implied certain skills, and the fact of knowing them means incorporating that knowledge inside your body. And therefore, it is not simply a knowledge, an intellectual knowledge. It is a bodily knowledge, first of all.
Okay.
And I think that is also part of our identity.
But then we touch to almost animism, which is that each of your cell is the depository of some old knowledge. Would you say that? Up to this point?
I think, each of our cells consists of DNA, so there is the deposit of something which is transmitted anyway. I mean, I don't think we can just sort of say, we are what we are now, we are what we are, and what has made us before we ever came, or anybody ever thought of having us to start with. So you can't ignore that. But the point is that what we are and what we transmit will then become something else once it is transmitted.
What about what we had in a conversation by telephone recently, this idea of human treasures?
Yes.
Explain about that.
I think that UNESCO a few years ago had started out with the concept of living treasures. In order to ensure that the people who possessed the skills would be able to transmit them, to put them into the condition of transmitting them. Now, this idea of living treasures was mostly incorporated by the Japanese for Noh theater, for example, which was disappearing, or for the Chinese Peking opera, because, as you know, at certain points in China, certain characters from the Peking opera had actually been banned. So to bring back that knowledge, there was this idea of living treasure. But I think that the idea of living treasure should actually be extended to so many other realities. Because there are people, for example, who know how to make knives according to a certain tradition. There are others who know how to weave according to a particular tradition, or how to card wool according to a tradition. I think that this idea of living treasures, first of all, gives a new look upon the skill, the art or the artistry. And sort of, in French, there's a very good term which is réévaluer, to reevaluate it, and therefore to give it a new dimension. It also gives a new dimension to the people who hold this skill, who may be, people who are perhaps old, or or perhaps not necessarily having gone to university or anything of the sort, but on the contrary, people who know how to use their hands or how to move their bodies or whatever, and it gives them a new status in society, making people look upon them as sources of knowledge. And therefore, it might also create, and it is what is hoped, to create interest in the young who might want to learn it. And then eventually, if they want, transform it. But certainly learn it. The skills have to be learned before. It's like an artist. Picasso used to say, you can create modern art, but you have to know your classics, don't you?
Yes. Thank you, Vicki. Aqeel, you have a microphone there if you want. Okay. Aqeel, when you invited me in Baghdad, I was very surprised first, of course, because we always have, preconceived ideas. And when you go there, of course, you are so surprised that it is not exactly what you were expecting. One of the big striking thing you showed me in Baghdad is this book fair in the street, where you have thousands, not hundreds, thousands of people in several streets selling and buying second-hand books with this, poetry cafes all over the place, where you have old and young people saying poems and things like that. And you have the feeling that this kind of literature is in constant movement, doesn't pay attention to any kind of bomb or crisis or terrorism. People are there. They do exchange books and ideas. They do it since hundreds of years, and they will not stop. And you have the feeling that this traditional literature is in a constant move. And I have the feeling that it was obvious to me that Baghdad is one of the cradle of our culture, because it's the heart of the, Mesopotamia, and we have all this culture going back to us here in Europe. So Baghdad is our mother at all of us. And so you have the feeling that maybe Baghdad and this top level of Arab culture is creating this so strong input because it is constantly recycling the tradition. Can you accept this?
Yes, of course. By the way, now Baghdad is approved by UNESCO as a member of Literary Cities Network at UNESCO. And of course, Al Mutanabbi Street, you now explain. Mutanabbi Street, yes, he is the most famous Arab poet. Now we have every Friday these rituals of buying and selling and telling stories and poems there at Al Mutanabbi, and now we have in each province also they are imitating this experience. In Basra we had once just 2 months ago, and at Al Najaf, and all the provinces are making so. And this is the most important thing, that we have a continuous practice, because the intangible heritage, to be considered as intangible heritage, should be practiced by people. I mean, if it is no longer practiced, it is not considered as a, yes, this is the idea. And it also we should have community and groups that practicing them and feeling deeply from their heart that this is representing them. Mm-hmm. And if it is not, it will not be a heritage of them. You see, it could be land, or could be any group at another place or state in the world could claim that this is their heritage. So this is also important to fix their right in expressing also their heritage. But let me, if you allow me, Ferdinand,
yes, of course,
to speak a little about the literaries of intangible heritage. Since 1972, we had an international convention on protection the world heritage, cultural and natural heritage, which concerns with the sites, the archaeological sites, and the monuments, and if we could say the artificial, you see, sites. By the Convention of 2003, approved by UNESCO on the protection of the intangible cultural heritage, for the first time we have the, let me say, the spiritual kind or type of heritage, not just the material one of 1972. And this convention is rapidly approved by 30 countries since 2002. To 2006, and till 2013 we have more than 155 countries, which means that the countries and even their communities also are insisting on protecting their cultural intangible heritage, maybe more than the material ones. And this is something really great when we have communities, groups, and also countries who are insisting to join this agreement. But after joining...
Is this in line with the cultural diversity?
No, this is of 2005.
No, I know, but is there any... For you, theoretically, this brings, the 2003 brings to the 2005 convention?
Yes.
So the intangible heritage brings to the more respect of cultural diversity.
That's right. And now all of them, all the three conventions now are considered one by the experts of UNESCO and some other experts. They are trying to unify them within under one umbrella to make plans and programs that could really encircle all these items of these three conventions. Also, this convention, or let's say the intangible heritage protection, also brought to the world what is called the representative list. Now we don't have more, we are no longer have the living treasures. The living treasures is considered just once in 2008. Yes, and by the way, the Iraqi maqam is one of these living treasures also, which is a kind of music. And now we have a representative list. All the countries are competing all over the world to nominate their rituals and practices and their traditional craftsmanships also to win the recognition of UNESCO in considering them as a world intangible cultural heritage. And this one also, this matter helping in consolidating and spreading peace among communities and countries. I have one example, Nowruz file. Nowruz is a feast, is very famous. Its origin in Persia and the neighboring countries. So this file now more than 12 countries is working on this nomination. So it is a joint and common nomination, and UNESCO is paying very attention to this nomination. When we know these countries, which they were enemies from a time to time, for example, Iraq, Turkey, Iran, India, and other Caucasian also countries who celebrate this feast. So it's very important to have 12 countries working on this file together. And the most important thing, that the communities of these countries will feel proud of this ceremony that is being practiced over their borders. This is also...
It's more than just a national level, it's also including the local people. Yeah.
This is for the local level. Also, we have another experience in Iraq, because Iraq joined this agreement in 2010. And we nominate two files. The first one was Nowruz with the other 12 countries. And the second one was what we called the Prophet Al-Qadr, which is Saint George in Christianity. We have all over Iraq many practices celebrating the this personality who brings green wherever it comes, who brings peace and enjoyment to all the people. And we officially nominate this practice to the representative list. But unfortunately, 2 months after these nominations, we had ISIS, Daesh, is occupying Mosul, north of Iraq, and destroying the what we call the maqams, the places or the shrines or of Saint George or Al-Qadr there. So here also we have another threat to this practice, and UNESCO also through this convention have a special list for the intangible heritage under threat.
Yes, in danger.
Yes, and this is, I could also pay your attention about this, that what ISIS or the other extremist groups is doing in our region, in fact, they are against humanity and against cultural diversity. They are trying just to impose one culture and one color of thinking or ideology on the others. And this is, of course, opposes with the principles of cultural heritage, both intangible and the material ones, and they destroyed, as you see, many museums and archaeological sites in Iraq and Syria. So they are making war, they are declaring war against the material and the intangible heritage in the region. And this is a very dangerous letter from them, and it needs really a good solidarity in both
international.
Yes, international, to at least send a message to the people and the communities of that area that the world is with them, and the world also is ready to help them healing these sites and getting back these cultural heritage treasures.
Would you say that Basra will be culture capital, Arab capital of culture? That's the other way around. Would have a special focus on this question of the intangible heritage, first, and second, on bringing the international artistic and cultural community there to, feed back this very important fight to keep cultural diversity alive, etc., etc. Can you talk about Basra program,
Yes,
if it is already existing, because
yes,
it's not yet there, it's 4 years?
Basra is approved 2018, but I think due to the situation, it will be delayed to 2021 and beyond. But still the idea there, because Basra also one of the richest and diverse cities in the
Can you explain
region.
why it is diverse?
It is diverse. It's conclude Christians, Muslims, and in the very early in the last century also
Ethiopian?
Jewish. And
Jewish.
we have still till now Sabian who are following the Prophet Yahya, John, I think in English. And also we have gypsum there, Iraqi gypsums. And we have what we called the black art, the Iraqi black minority also.
Where are they coming from?
Basra. They are coming from Africa in the Abbasid era, and they occupied Basra at that time. And there is a very famous Arabic saying, says, بعد خراب البصرة, after the damage of Basra, after the destroying of Basra. You see, when it's said when you are thinking about something in a late way, you see, yes, and late time. So Basra is very rich and very diverse. Also, it is similar to Marseille. It is on the coast. The only Iraqi coast is through Basra. It is just 90 kilometers coast, and it is open to the Gulf and to the world at that time, especially if we knew that countries now like Qatar and Bahrain was just a part of Basra
Yes.
just 50 years ago. So it's a very rich, and the Gulf countries are feeling nodulistic way towards Basra. They are considering Basra as the mother of their cultural roots, especially the dances and the practices of those hunters and black Iraqis there. They are inspiring them. And by the way, Bahrain and even Saudi Arabia succeeded in inscribing and including one of the dances of the Gulf, which is also its origin is from Basra. And this is something really good that we could make or nominate new files in the future, that all the Gulf countries through Basra could introduce it to the world.
Last question. Are young artists in Basra involved in recycling, if I can say so, this kind of roots and tradition? Is this something that young artists would take on board and transform and includes in their creation?
Yes, of course. There is a very famous band, a national band in Basra. The second one, which is considered national after Baghdad, it is the Basra band. And they are young people, and they are practicing really a new versions. They are not imitating their mothers and fathers in that. And they are really practicing new arts and new musical shows and traditional craftsmanships.
You know, we don't have very much clue about that. We need some connections, internet, video stuff. Would be very nice to have that. Maybe a few questions from the audience, or maybe you, Vicki.
Just before we give over to the audience, I think this fact of reinterpreting in a modern idiom what is the heritage of the past, hasn't started today.
No.
It started a long time ago. And the point is that where it can be enriched today is the fact that it can be diffused at a much wider level than it ever was, because today we have internet and we have all these media, where before it could only be it could only be spread nationally or regionally. Now it can spread over to different countries, and this in itself is a basis also for developing interculturalism. Because if we take different cultures, for example, I come from the Mediterranean, so I'm just going to talk about one particular instrument around the Mediterranean, the rebab.
Yeah.
So if you look at the tradition of the rebab, you will notice that this is an instrument which has really gone round the Mediterranean, but changed its shape even while going round. In Sardinia, it looks more like a lyre. In Tunisia, it looks more like a humped instrument, etc., etc. There are certain characteristics which are the same, for example, the number of chords, the way it is played, etc. And I think that this is just an example to show that this idiom, which has before the era of multimedia ever spread, had already spread and changed around the Mediterranean. Today, this, thanks to the new means of communication, can actually link up to other forms, other traditional instruments, and integrate itself to create new forms of music. And I'd like just to say a last thing about the living treasures. It's true. I think that one of the problems about UNESCO is that it has passed too quickly from the concept of living treasures to the concept of living traditions.
Which is different.
And the transition has not been made. It's just created a new area of living tradition. So now there's a general race to to classify one's traditions as living traditions to be recognized by UNESCO. But I think the possibilities that living treasures brought with it has not been exploited enough, also because the idea of living treasures meant that the person who was nominated as a living treasure had to be financed by the government.
Oh, yeah.
To pass on, and this is where the governments, in many cases, did not want to
They
get
didn't
into
want
it.
to give them a fee.
Yes.
It's very interesting, but we're just like 2 days before Bab el-Med here, and it's a very interesting event. At the same time, there are critics that people say, well, this kind of world music is something that is completely deteriorating and uniformizing the tradition. Like any jazz saxophonist would have some Gnawa people with him and do a new album where he would play saxophone and with the Gnawa in the back. And this is not in respect either of the jazz music, saxophone itself, or the Gnawa. Is it a progress or is it a recession? The question is in debate, and there will be probably people asking this question in Bab el-Med in a few days, just over there. A few questions around. Yes, please, Svetlana.
I want to follow up on what you just said.
We don't have sound.
It's coming? Okay,
Okay.
yeah. Following up on what Ferdinand just said, I don't know whether you've heard, and I mentioned it briefly, there is this new concept in the US now called cultural appropriation. And it is about cultural appropriation is basically the appropriation by a dominant culture of traditions of a marginalized culture. And there is widespread opposition towards this as a kind of post-colonialism, as a kind of cultural imperialism, especially on the part of Native American groups. But that happened also with the kimono show at the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, saying, you're exoticizing our culture, this is Orientalism. The latest thing is a critique of J.K. Rowling's, the Harry Potter books series. Her latest work, it's coming to the United States, and she's using some Native American tradition and weaving it into the narrative of Harry Potter. And all this is opposing. You cannot use our cultures. You cannot exploit our cultures for yourself. And that's also, there are a lot of critiques of Halloween costumes that use costumes of different cultures. So I wonder what you think about that. Because on the one hand, culture has always been an exchange of cultures, a mix. On the other hand, there is a moment of colonial plundering of marginal culture. So how does all this... And also, I think WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, had some suggestions about copyrighting cultural heritage. So,
which is
that is very American. The copywriting means copywriting means that automatically you have to start paying money. So I personally think that people feel threatened in their culture when their culture is not being properly transmitted or regenerated, and therefore, in many cases, when a group of people feels that this is not happening or it's not happening properly, they start wanting to fossilize it, to preserve it the way it is. Obviously, you mentioned a very particular example, which is that of the American Indians, where which is one of the elements in North America, where one of the ethnic groups in North America, where these people feel that they have not been done fairly by society. So obviously, everything that they have has to be preserved because society has been so unjust to them, and therefore this is looked upon as an exploitation. But that's where I think that the idea of preservation and protection becomes very important, because if people feel that something is worthy of protection and preservation, it means it is being given status. And once it is being given status and recognition, then it can perhaps be allowed to be transformed. But if people who are already feeling that they themselves have no recognition. It's also a way of reivindicating recognition through their customs.
Certainly, yes, yes. Any question? André? The mic is bringing to you by the very famous NG Coat, the Secretary General. Yes, I will.
Could I, before that?
Yes, yes. So first, André, first, Aqeel.
Yes. Something also related to what Madame just raised, and also what Vicki said. It is not just the fear of the communities about their ICH not to be recognized. It's also related to the great powers or the imperialism, let's say, as an ideology. For example, we have the USA, UK, Australia, Canada, Singapore, Ireland, and a few other countries still not yet approving or joining the Convention of 2003 of ICH.
That's true.
And this is an important point.
Absolutely.
And Israel also following them and not joining this. And this is also related to the globalization. So here it is the duty of these communities and groups to insist on practicing and protecting and making these treasures and practices living from a generation to another.
To another, yeah.
And also from maybe time by time, these powers or countries like USA, for example, is thinking seriously about not joining this convention, but they are making good procedures to protect some of these rights of these peoples, Red Indians and others. And this is really a paradox. They are not approving or joining the convention. At the same time, they are doing good job in planning for protecting these practices, let's say. It's really a paradox.
Yes. But they're not joining the convention because they withdrew from UNESCO, no?
Yeah, yeah.
They withdrew
Also,
No, even before. Even before.
But I think it's the economical dimension of it is extremely important. André?
Often the discourse, the academic discourse around heritage and archive and intangible heritage is a lot about protection, preservation, and conservation. And I think we need to do much more in terms of promotion. And music does a lot in terms of promotion. There's a DJ in South Africa called DJ Black Coffee. And he uses a lot of traditional rhythms, melodies, beats, and he puts traditional music into the public realm that creates much more appreciation. And I think we need to change the discourse sometimes. There's also the question about copyright. And I think in South Africa we tried to do a bill on traditional and indigenous knowledge. And that bill really didn't work. It almost damaged the copyright legislation. There are very different purposes in terms of trying to keep things the way they are, and copyright which is used to promote for economic purposes. So it's a very dangerous legislative route.
That's making very good sense. I know this is it's everywhere. I mean, it's universal. It's not only in South Africa or in Iraq or in Malta. It's really everywhere, this question about the limits of the copyright in terms of intangible heritage protection. It's kind of different.
Yes, this is a very important point, really. This is why UNESCO now is imposing on the countries, the parties in this convention, ICH convention, that each country should make a national inventory list.
Okay.
And send it to UNESCO to be approved. After that, no one, either a country or international or community organization, could claim that this practice is theirs or not. So each country which doesn't have this list, could not really make any legal procedure to protect it. So the first step is to make this
The
national
list,
list.
yeah.
Then after that, they will have really the legal copyright for it.
Okay. Any question? Excuse me. Adel. No, you can't speak. We know. We love you because you speak. So if you stop speaking, we don't love you anymore. Oh, there is somebody over there. Okay.
Thank you for your
Vesna.
introductions. I'm thinking about
Please
what would be...
tell where you've come from, Vesna.
I'm coming from Belgrade, Culture Center of Belgrade. And I'm dealing with contemporary art. But you mentioned new technologies as a means of transmission. What do you think about the future of protection of intangible heritage regarding new technologies and new media? Maybe they are not going only to transmit, but to document and maybe to be something instead of living treasures. What do you think about new technologies and new media in the future regarding the protection of intangible heritage?
Well, definitely. I mean, we've already started, actually. You have all these documentaries. In Italy, for example, in the 60s, people were going around filming people who, I remember a particular documentary on the Taranta, filming the whole tradition of the Taranta, the way it was originally started, going into the farms and filming the
old people.
Exactly. So, I think that has already started, and it is very important that it continues, because it becomes a memory.
Yes, of course, but what will be with those humans who are possessing those skills you mentioned as living, and about that relation, human beings, new technologies in protection. So could new technologies somehow document too much, too directly to play instead of a living treasure?
Yes.
Well, yes, because if people pass away, unfortunately. So, I think you need both. I think you need the persons, because there is nothing as motivating as speaking to a person and watching a real person doing something. This is the difference, Why is theatre so important even today? Because watching a person actually acting in front of you on a stage is not the same as watching her doing it in a film. It's not the same experience at all. In fact, they act differently.
But it's facilitating the protection, really.
Exactly. It's just a tool to facilitate. But right. you cannot exclude one from the other. However, I think that that on the contrary, all this contributes to memory, and memory is never single. In the case of intangible heritage, memory is collective, because it is very much related to identity. And what is interesting is the fact that the memories of what my people have done is so close to the memories of what the people next to me have done, who identify it as being something completely different, perhaps to claim their own identity. And this is where the parallels and the oppositions begin to start.
Very interesting. Adel. And then we probably stop, because we have the... Yeah.
Oui, je vais proposer un autre
Yes,
angle.
I suggest another angle. I'm thinking of the audience. Because this is instrumentalized in our country. The question of intangible heritage can be instrumentalized and manipulated, for example, in Morocco, by making culture part of folklore. The question that is raised is, to what extent can we torture heritage to make creation, to create the heritage of tomorrow? This is the question of our conversation. What I want to say is that this heritage, this intangible heritage, has to be part of the constitution of human development of the individual. What I mean is it's the role of the state to conserve and protect. I'm not talking about UNESCO. This is another category. For it to be useful for our own communities, so that they know their own history, and to allow human development, so that there's a question of freedom of creation as well, whether it's black magic or white magic, because the question of the Convention of 2003, but also the question of the Convention of 2005, where it's a question of more of creation. But it was created because there is a link, so that you shouldn't have a hegemony of culture, American culture, on the rest of the world. But we find ourselves with a French cultural exception, which also exerts its influence over the territories, nevertheless. So, finally, I'd like to say that the question of material capital is being manipulated in our country. I don't know what's happening in other countries, because we talk about intangible capital. This is the World Bank who's invented this concept, going back to the 1980s here, which means that if you're poor materially, this is tangible. If you're very rich intangibly, so our countries are very rich intangibly. So the question that is asked is, where do you put the cursor between public service and the market? Because in the 2005 convention, it was filled with questions to do with the market, but they forgot about the public service aspect, which goes back to the question of human development and social development. So all of this, in the end, it would be a good idea to put the spotlight in a different place and to look at the question of intangible heritage from the point of view UNESCO and the UN, etc., to see what is the extent of appropriation of this intangible heritage, in other words, history, art, anthropology, etc., in order to build the individual and citizens, the individual in the modern sense of the term, who knows where they come from and is able to project into the future. Thank you, Adele. I'd just like to say that what we're doing here is that, as you will see from the program tomorrow, we'll have one part of the session where we'll have 6 tables, we'll have 6 conversations. Each person can go to whichever table they like, and the idea is that we don't do a summary of everything that's been said, but each table, each conversation will make 3 recommendations for future action. Perhaps we have a few already, but the idea is that after these 2 days, we have 3 times 6, 18 recommendations, which will be the final document from this 2-day conference. So keep that in mind, please. And this will be raised again in the discussion tomorrow, and we'll have a document which will enable us to change the world, of course. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you, and Vicki and Aqeel. We're going to move on to the speed dating now. So we have these 10 hosts are each going to receive 1 visitor every quarter of an hour. It's going to take place over there. So I need to have the foghorn. Where's the foghorn? No, I'm not joking. You'll see, it makes a lot of noise.